do believe we're live. Giving it a second to pop up on the other services. Did it show up on X? All right, we're live on X. And I think we're live on Rumble. And I think we're live on YouTube. Perfect. So, good morning, those who are in the same time zone as me, and hope the morning has been going well for everyone else. Welcome to another stream of reading, where we are going through the book of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. I have been away for a little bit since the end of the year, and I haven't really jumped back into the streams for no good reason. I have my excuses, but the jury's out on if they're good or not. Some of it has to do with work and also not being a morning person. I don't know if you can tell. So to the top of this thing before we get started, I'm curious what others might think. And if you're watching this, post now, sound off, give me a comment on X, or even this video in, like, if you can comment after a stream is done. And just let me know if it's better to watch something like this at night, turning this into a late night read, or if the morning still works the best. The issue for me in the mornings is that I am not a morning person in the slightest. I get so grungy and groggy, and it takes me forever to get up. And I don't mind doing it when it comes to reading things like this, but it takes a lot of work to get me to here, to the stream, mentally, physically. And usually I am fully awake at around like 9 or 10, despite best efforts. And so just something to put out there. And before I get into this, just a little bit of a recap. We have Prince Alveric, who was tasked by his father to go marry the King of Elfland's daughter. And he does. He kidnaps her from Elfland. Not really kidnaps her. He steals her away. She is also interested in going with him. They both come back to the lands we know. They get married. They have a kid named Orion. And because she can't quite fit into the human customs of Christendom, she finds herself in a rough spot. And just at about that time, her father, the king of Elfland, sends out a troll with a rune that she reads in her frustration and desperation, and she is whisked away back to Elfland. And Alveric goes on a quest to find her. But the Elfland is not there anymore. It has ebbed away. And the lands where it used to be are nothing and despairing. So he forms a crew to go and find those. Meanwhile, his son, through her, Orion, takes on the hunt. Finds that the hunt is a very pleasurable thing. He finds solace in the woods, but he's always hearing the horns of Elfland. At which point, it is revealed that the King of Elfland is pulled back Elfland from Alveric specifically, as one might pull back a tide. Not that one would, but as a tide might recede, so is he pulling it back. And wherever Alveric is, Elfland ebbs away. And wherever he's not, Elfland returns. And where we stopped, Orion had found himself a unicorn that had broken through Elfland into the lands we know, somehow. And things are about to get crazy, I think, but I'm not sure. We ended on chapter 19. Chapter 18. We finished chapter 18, and today are going into chapter 19. 12 old men without magic. So, let me just pop in this book so you can see what we're reading. If you want to follow along, as with any of these streams I do, generally speaking, it's best to follow along with the same edition, as you can be aligned pretty much in terms of page number and line number. Not as huge of a deal here, as this is not a Like this edition seems to be the more legit of them. I bought an independent printing earlier that had mistakes in AI art, and that was rough. So this is the main edition. It has you can tell it's more legit. It has an introduction by Neil Gaiman, whatever you think about him, and yeah, I would say let's get started. We're 5 minutes in already, folks. So, chapter 19. 12 old men without magic. Sounds like 12 Angry Men. But before we get started, in the morning I like to have a little bit of a nice coffee to warm the vocals. And a coffee and a book in the morning is quite nice. This is some sort of snickerdoodle blend. I'm not sure exactly if I like it. It's also coffee I bought almost a year ago. It'll do the trick, but I don't know, man. All right. With strange coffee in hand and a strange story in hand, let's get started. Now, few things pass a village and leave no talk behind them, nor did this unicorn. For the three that saw it going by in the starlight immediately told their families, and many of these ran from their houses to tell the good news to others. For all strange news was accounted good in Earl, because of the talk that it made, and talk was held to be needful when work was over to pass the evenings away. So they talked long of the unicorn. And after a day or two, in the forge of Gnarl, the Parliament of Earl was met again, seated by mugs of mead, discussing the unicorn. And some rejoiced and said that Orion was magic, because unicorns were of magic stock, and came from beyond our fields. Therefore, said one, he has been to lands of which it does not become us to speak, and is magic, as all things are which dwell over there. And some agreed, and held that their plans had come to fruition. But others said that the beast went by in the starlight, if beast it were, and who could say it was a unicorn? And one said that in the starlight it was hard to see it at all, and another said unicorns were hard to recognize. And then they began to discuss the size and shape of these beasts, and all the known legends that told of them, and came no nearer to agreeing together whether or not their lord had hunted a unicorn. Till at last Gnarl, seeing that they would not thus come by the truth, and deeming it necessary that the fact should be established one way or the other forever, rose up and told them that the time had come for the vote. So by a method they had of casting shells of various colors into a horn, that was passed from man to man, they voted about the unicorn as Gnarl had commanded. And a hush fell, and Gnarl counted, and it was seen to have been established by a vote that there had been no unicorn. Sorrowfully, then, that Parliament of Earl saw that their plans to have a magic lord had failed. They were all old men, and the hope that they had for so long being gone, they turned less. They were all old men, and the hope that they had for so long being gone, they turned less easily to newer plans than they had to the plan that they made so long ago. What should they do now? They said. How come by magic? How could they do that? The world should remember Earl. 12 old men without magic? They sat there over their mead, and it could not lighten their sadness. I have to stop here almost right away. There's a unicorn, guys. Okay, sure, yeah, right, okay. Well, let's put it to a vote then. Oh, yeah, yes, let's vote. And they vote that they didn't see one. Sorry, it is maddening. These 12 old dorks. But Orion was away with his hounds near that great inlet of Elfland, where it lay as it were at high tide, touching the very grass of the fields we know. He went there at evening, when the horns blew clear to guide him, and waited there, all quiet at the edge of those fields, for the unicorns to steal across the border. For he hunted stags no more. And as he went over those fields in the late afternoon, folk working on the farms would greet him cheerily. But when still he went eastwards, they spoke to him less and less, till at last, when he neared the border and still kept on, they looked his way no more, but left him and his hounds to their own devices. and by the time the sun set he would be standing quiet by a hedge that ran right down into the frontier of twilight, with his hounds all gathered close in under the hedge, with his eye on them, all lest one of them dared to move. And the pigeons would come home to the trees of the fields we know, and twittering starlings, and the elfin horns would blow clear silver magical music, thrilling the chilled air, and all the colors of clouds would go suddenly changing. It was then, in the failing light and the darkening of colors, that Orion would watch for a dim white shape stepping out of the border of twilight. And this evening, just as he hushed a hound with his hand, just as all our fields went dim, there slipped a great white unicorn out of the border, still munching lilies, such as never grew in any fields of ours. He came a whiteness on a perfectly silent feet, 4 or 5 yards into the fields we know, and stood there still as moonlight, and listened and listened and listened. Orion never moved, and he kept his hounds silent by some power he had or by some wisdom of theirs, and in 5 minutes the unicorn made a step or two forward, and began to crop the long sweet earthly grasses. And as soon as he moved there came others through the deep blue border of twilight, and all at once there were 5 of them feeding there, and still Orion stood with his hounds and waited. Little by little the unicorns moved further away from the border, lured further and further into the fields we know by the deep, rich, earthly grasses, on which all 5 of them browsed in the silent evening. If a dog barked, even if a late cock crew, up went all their ears at once, and they stood watchful, not trusting anything in the fields of men, or venturing into them very far. But at last the one that had come first through the twilight got so far from his magical home that Orion was able to run between him and the frontier, and his hounds came behind him. And then had Orion been toying with the chase. Then he had hunted but for an idle whim, and not for that deep love of the huntsman's craft that only huntsmen know. Then he had lost everything. For his hounds would have chased the nearest unicorns, and they would have been in a moment across the frontier and lost. And if the hounds had followed, they would have been lost too, and all that day's work would have gone for nothing. But Orion led his hounds to chase the furthest, watching all the while to see if any hound would try to pursue the others. And only one began to, but Orion's whip was ready, and so he cut his quarry off from its home, and his hounds, for the second time, were in full cry after a unicorn. As soon as the unicorn heard the feet of the hounds, and saw with one flash of his eye that he could not get to his enchanted home, he shot forward with a sudden spring of limbs, and went like an arrow over the fields we know. When he came to hedges, he did not seem to gather his limbs to leap, but seemed to glide over them with motionless muscles, galloping again when he touched the grass once more. In that first rush the hounds drew far ahead of Orion, and this enabled him to head off the unicorn wherever it tried to turn to the magical land. And at such turnings he came near to his hounds again. And the third time that Orion turned the unicorn, it galloped straight away, and so continued over the fields of men. The cry of the hounds went through the calm of the evening like a long ripple across the sleeping lake, following the unseen way of some strange diver. In that straight gallop the unicorn gained so much on the hounds that soon Orion only saw him far off, a white spot moving along a slope in the gloaming. Then it reached the top of the valley and passed from view, but that strong, queer scent that led the hounds like a song remained clear on the grass, and they never checked or faltered except for a moment at streams. Even there their ranging noses picked up the magical scent before Orion came up to give them his aid. And as the hunt went on, the daylight faded away, till the sky was all prepared for the coming of stars, and 1 or 2 stars appeared, and a mist came up from the streams and spread all white over the fields, till they could not have been the unicorn. And 1 or 2 stars appeared, and a mist came up from the streams, and spread all white over fields, till they could not have seen the unicorn if he had been close before them. The very trees seemed sleeping. They passed by little houses, lonely sheltered by the elms, shut off by high hedges of yew from those that roamed the fields, houses that Orion had never seen or known till the chance course of this unicorn brought him suddenly past their doors. Dogs barked as they passed, and continued barking along, for that magical scent on the air and the rush in the voice of the pack told them something strange was afoot. and at first they barked because they would have shared in what was afoot, and afterwards to warn their masters about the strangeness. They barked long through the evening. And once, as they passed a little house in a cluster of old thorns, a door suddenly opened, and a woman stood gazing to see them go by. She could have seen no more than gray shapes, but Orion in that moment... She could have seen no more than gray shapes, but Orion in the moment, as he passed, saw all the glow of the house, and the yellow light streaming out into the cold. The merry warmth cheered him, and he would have rested a while in that little oasis of man in the lonely fields. But the hounds went on, and he followed, and those in the houses heard their cry go past like the sound of trumpet, like the sound of a trumpet, whose echoes go fading away among the furthest hills. Interesting. A fox heard them coming, and stood quite still and listened. At first he was puzzled. Then he caught the scent of the unicorn, and all was clear to him, for he knew by the magic flavor that it was something coming from Elfland. But when the sheep caught the scent, they were terrified, and ran all huddled together, until they could run no more. Cattle leaped up from their sleep, gazed dreamily, and wondered, but the unicorn went through them and away, as some rose-scented breeze that had strayed from valley gardens into the streets of a city. I read that silly. Let me back it up. Cattle leaped from their sleep, gazed dreamily, and wondered, but the unicorn went through them and away, as some rose-scented breeze that has strayed from valley gardens into the streets of a city slips through the noisy traffic and is gone. Soon, all the stars were looking on those quiet fields through which the hunt went with its exaltation, a line of vehement life cleaving through sleep and silence. And now the unicorn, far out of sight, though he was, no longer gained a little at every hedge, for at first he lost no more pace at any hedge than a bird loses at passing a clear of a cloud, while the great hounds struggled through what gaps they could find, or lay on their sides and wriggled between the streams of bushes. But now he gathered his strength with more effort at every hedge, and sometimes hit the top of the hedge and stumbled. He was galloping slower, too, for this was a journey such as no unicorn made through the deep calm of Elfland, and something told the tired hounds they were drawing nearer, and a new joy entered their voices. They crossed a few more black hedges, and then there loomed before them the dark of a wood. When the unicorn entered the wood, the voices of the hounds were clear in his ears. A pair of foxes saw him going slowly, and they ran along beside him to see what would befall the magic creature coming weary to them from Elfland. One on each side they ran, keeping his slow pace and watching him, and they had no fear of the hounds, though they heard their cry, for they knew that nothing that followed that magical scent would turn aside after any earthly thing. So he went laboring through the wood, and the foxes watched him curiously all the way. Interesting. This is an interesting chase. Strange coffee flavors, man. The hounds entered the wood, and the great oaks ran with the sound of them. I read that really weird. The hounds entered the wood, and the great oaks rang with the sound of them. And Orion followed with an enduring speed that he may have got from our fields, or that may have come to him over the border from Elfland. The dark of the wood was intense, but he followed his hound's cry, and they did not need to see with that wonderful scent to guide them. They never wavered as they followed that scent, but went on through gloaming and starlight. It was not like any hunt of fox or stag, or another fox will cross the line of a fox, or a stag may pass through a herd of stags and hinds. Even a flock of sheep will bewilder hounds by crossing the line they follow. But this unicorn was the only magical thing in all our fields that night, and his scent lay unmistakable over the earthly grass, a burning, pungent flavor of enchantment among the things of every day. They hunted him clear through the wood, and down to a valley, the two foxes keeping with him and watching still. He picked his feet carefully as he went down the hill, as though his weight hurt them, while he descended the slope, yet his pace was as fast as that of the hounds going down. Then he went a little way along the Sorry. Quick clarification. This is not an audiobook. This is not a performance. I am reading out loud for the joy of it. And I shall be reading imperfectly. So then he went a little way along the trough of the valley, turning to his left as soon as he came down the hill. But the hounds gained on him then, and he turned for the opposite slope, and then his weariness could be concealed no longer. The thing that all wild creatures conceal to the last, he toiled over every step, as though his legs dragged his body heavily. Orion saw him from the opposite slope. And when the unicorn got to the top, the hounds were close behind him, so that he suddenly whipped around his great single horn and stood before them threatening. Then the hounds bayed about him, but the horn waved and bowed with such a swift grace that no hound got a grip. They knew death when they saw it, and eager though they were to fasten upon him, they leaped back from that flashing horn. Then Orion came up with his bow, but he would not shoot, perhaps because it was hard to put an arrow safely past his pack of hounds, perhaps because of a feeling such as we have today, and which is no new thing among us, that it was unfair to the unicorn. Instead, he drew an old sword that he was wearing, and advanced through his hounds, and engaged that deadly horn. And the unicorn arched his neck, and the horn flashed at Orion, and weary though the unicorn was, yet a mighty force remained in that muscular neck to drive the blow that he aimed. And Orion barely parried. He thrust at the unicorn's throat, but the great horn tossed the sword aside from its aim, and again lunged at Orion. Again he parried with the whole weight of his arm, and had but an inch to spare. He thrust again at the throat, and the unicorn parried the sword thrust almost contemptuously. Again and again the unicorn aimed fair at Orion's heart. The huge white beast stepped forward, pressing Orion back. That graceful bowing neck, with its white arch of hard muscle driving the deadly horn, was wearying Orion's arm. Once more he thrust and failed. He saw the unicorn's eyes flash wickedly in the starlight. He saw all white before him, the fearful arch of its neck. He knew he could turn aside its heavy blows no more. And then a hound got a grip in front of the right shoulder. No moments passed before many another hound leaped up onto the unicorn, each with a chosen grip. For all that they looked like a each with a chosen grip. For all that they looked like a rabble rolling and heaving by chance. Orion thrust no more, for many hounds all at once were between him and his enemy's throat. Awful groans came from the unicorn, such sounds as are not heard in the fields we know. And then there was no sound but the deep growl of the hounds that roared over the wonderful carcass as they wallowed in fabulous blood. Huh. Wow. Huh. Interesting. Okay. A brief pause to kind of consider this. So unicorns seem to be majestic, right? And so in here, it's weird seeing unicorns be hunted. And it's not that I favor unicorns. It's seeing them as something different than like a thing to preserve. I think we've come to find unicorns beautiful and wholesome and pure in our time. Or, you know how, I don't know, and I forget which Harry Potter was. The first one, maybe? The Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone, where it's drinking the unicorn blood. And that scene is like this kind of perversion, this bad thing. But here, this hunt seems natural. I mean, there's a mightiness to the hunt. This fey creature is violent, while majestic still. And yet, the hunt itself is exciting, and it is like a swashbuckling fight as Orion challenges this unicorn, duels its horn, and they finally conquer it. And just look at the text here. The hounds that roared over the wonderful carcass as they wallowed in fabulous blood. So there's this sense of like, yeah, this was fair got, and this blood itself is fabulous. I don't know. The language is very interesting here. But I digress, and we should continue to chapter 20. A historical fact. Amongst the weary hounds, refreshed with fury and triumph, Orion stepped with his whip and drove them away from the monstrous dead body, and sent the lash quivering round in a wide circle, while in his other hand he took his sword and cut off the unicorn's head. He also took the unicorn's head. My God. Okay. He also took the skin of the long white neck and brought it away, dangling empty from the head. All the while the hounds bayed and made eager rushes one by one at that magical carcass whenever one saw a chance of eluding the whip. So that it was long before Orion got his trophy, for he had to work as hard with his whip as with his sword. But at last he had it slung by a leather thong But at last he had it slung by a leather thong over his shoulder, the great horn pointing upwards past the right side of his head, and the smeared skin hanging down along his back. And while he arranged it thus, he allowed his hounds to worry the body again, and taste the wonderful blood. Then he called to them, and blew a note on his horn, and turned slowly home towards Earl, and they all followed behind him. And the two foxes stole up to taste the curious blood, for they had sat and waited for this. Oh, goodness gracious. I have the picture now, the two foxes that were traveling with this unicorn, like, hey, buddy, how's it going? Yeah, buddy, you running from some hounds? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great, great, we're gonna kind of accompany you. We'll divert some attention. And no, they just wanted the blood. Yeah, man, this is good. Was it as good as you thought? Oh, yeah, even better. This is fun. While the unicorn was climbing his last hill, Orion felt such fatigue that he could have gone little further. But now that the heavy head hung from his shoulders, all his fatigue was gone, and he trod with a lightness such as he had in the mornings, for it was his first unicorn. And his hounds seemed refreshed, as though the blood they had lapped had some strange power in it, and they came home riotously, gambolling and rushing ahead as when newly loosed from their kennels. Thus Orion came home over the downs in the night, till he saw the valley before him full of the smoke of Earl, where one late night was burning in a window of one of his towers. And coming down the slopes by familiar ways, he brought his hounds to their kennels, and just before dawn had touched the heights of the downs, he blew his horn before his postern and just before dawn had touched the heights of the downs, he blew his horn before his postern door. And the aged guardian of the door, when he opened it to Orion, saw the great horn of the unicorn bobbing over his head. This was the horn that was sent in later years as a gift from the Pope to King Francis. Benvenuto Cellini tells of it in his memoirs. He tells how Pope Clement sent for him and a certain Tobia, and ordered them to make designs for the setting of a unicorn's horn, the finest ever seen. Judge then of Orion's delight, when the horn of the first unicorn he ever took was such as to be esteemed generations later the finest ever seen, and in no less a city than Rome, with all her opportunities to acquire and compare such things. For a number of these curious horns must have been available for the Pope to have selected for the gift, the finest ever seen. But in the simpler days of my story, the rarity of the horn was so great that unicorns were still considered fabulous. The year of the gift to King Francis would be about 1530, the horn being mounted in gold, and the contract went to Tobia, and not to Benvenuto Cellini. I mention the date because there are those who care little for a tale if it be not here, and they are supported by history, and who even in history care more for fact than philosophy. If any such reader have followed the fortunes of Orion so far, he will be hungry by now for a date of historical... If any such reader have followed the fortunes of Orion so far, he will be hungry by now for a date, or a historical fact. As for the date, I give him 1530, while for the historical fact, I select that generous gift recorded by Benvenuto Cellini, because it may well be that just where he came to unicorns, such a reader may have felt furthest away from history, and have felt loneliest just at this point for want of historical things. How the unicorn's horn found its way from the castle of Earl, and in what hands it wandered, and how it came at last to the city of Rome, would of course make another book. But all that I need to say now about that horn is that Orion took the whole head to Threll, who took off the skin and washed it and boiled the skull for hours, and replaced the skin and stuffed the neck with straw, and Orion set it in the midmost place among all the heads that hung in the high hall. And the rumor went all through Earl, as swift as unicorns gallop, telling of this fine horn that Orion had won. So that the Parliament of Earl met again in the forge of Gnarl. They sat at a table there debating the rumor, and others besides Threll had seen the head. And at first, for the sake of old divisions, some held to their opinion that there had been no unicorn. They drank Gnarl's goodly mead and argued against the monster. But after a while, whether Threll's argument convinced them, or whether, as is more likely, they yielded from generosity, which arose like a beautiful flower out of the mellow mead, whatever it was, that debate of those that had opposed the unicorn languished, And when the vote was put, it was declared that Orion had killed a unicorn, which he had hunted hither from beyond the fields we know. And at this they all rejoiced, for they saw at last the magic for which they had longed, and for which they had planned so many years ago, when all were younger, and had had more hope in their plans. And as soon as the vote was taken, Gnarl brought out more mead, and they drank again to mark the happy occasion, for magic at last, said they, had come on Orion, and a glorious future surely awaited Earl. And the long room, and the candles, and the friendly men, and the deep comfort of mead made it easy to look a little way forward into time, and to see a year or so that had not yet come, and to see coming glories glowing a little way off. And they told again of the days, but nearer now, when the distant lands should hear of the vale that they loved. They told again of the fame of the fields of Earl going from city to city. One praised its castle, another its huge high downs, another the vale itself, all hidden from every land, another the dear quaint houses built by an olden folk, another the deep of the woods that lay over the skyline, and all spoke of the time when the wide world should hear of it all, because of the magic that there was in Orion, for they knew that the world has a quick ear for magic, and always turns towards the wonderful, even though it be nearly asleep. Their voices were high, praising magic, telling again of the unicorn, glorying in the future of Earl, when suddenly in the doorway stood the Freer. He was there in his long white robe, with its trimming of mauve, in the door with the knight behind him. As they looked in the light of their candles, they could see he was wearing an emblem on a chain of gold round his neck. Gnarl bade him welcome. Some moved a chair to the table, but he had heard them speak of the unicorn. He lifted his voice from where he stood and addressed them. "Cursed be unicorns," he said, "and all their ways, and all things that be magic." In the awe that suddenly changed, the mellow room one cried, "Master, curse not us." "Good Freer," said Gnarl, "we hunted no unicorns." But the Freer raised up his hand again against the unicorns and cursed them yet. "Cursed be their horn," he cried, "and the place where they dwell, and the lilies whereupon they feed. Cursed be all songs that tell of them. Cursed be they utterly with everything that dwelleth beyond salvation." He paused to allow them to renounce the unicorns, standing still in the doorway, looking sternly into the room. And they thought of the sleekness of the unicorn's hide, his swiftness, the grace of his neck, and his dim beauty catering by when he came past Earl in the evening. They thought of his stalwart and redoubtable horn. They remembered the old songs that told of him. They sat in uneasy silence and would not renounce the unicorn. And the Freer knew that they thought. And the Freer knew what they thought, and he raised his hand again, clear in the candle light, with the knight behind him. "Cursed be their speed," he said, "and their sleek white hide. Cursed be their beauty, and all that they have of magic, and everything that walks by enchanted streams." And still he saw in their eyes a lingering love for those things that he forbade, and therefore he ceased not yet. He lifted his voice yet louder and continued with his eye sternly upon those troubled faces. "And cursed be trolls, elves, goblins, and fairies upon the earth, and hippogriffs, and Pegasus in the air, and all the tribes of the merfolk under the sea. Our holy rites forbid them. And cursed be all doubts, all singular dreams and fancies, and all fancies. And from magic may all true folk be turned away. Amen." He turned round suddenly and was into the night. A wind loitered about the door, and then flapped it to. And the large room in the Forge of Gnarl was as it had been but a few moments before, yet the mellow mood of it seemed dulled and dim. And then Gnarl spoke, rising up at the table's end and breaking the gloom of the silence. "Did we plan our plans so long ago, and put our faith in magic, that we should now renounce magical things, and curse our neighbors, the harmless folk beyond the fields we know, and the beautiful things of the air, and the dead mariners' lovers dwelling beneath the sea?" "No, no," said some, and they quaffed their mead again. And then one rose with his horn of mead held high, then another, and then another, till all were standing upright all round the light of the candles. "Magic!" one cried, and the rest with one accord took up this cry, till all were shouting, "Magic!" The Freer, on his homeward way, heard the cry of magic. He gathered his sacred robe more closely around him, and clutched his holy things, and set a spell that kept him from sudden demons, and the doubtful things of the mist. Interesting. Excuse me. If I recall, the Freer was the one who went with. No, no, I don't think the Freer went with Alveric. The Freer was the one who had the problems with uh, Lyrazel, the elf daughter, because she wouldn't stick to the Christian customs. Because she couldn't understand them. Like, these things are beautiful. Give thanks to the beautiful things. No, 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 no. It's a very interesting dynamic here. But we hadn't heard from the Freer in a while, so that's curious. But that is kind of a funny vision. He's walking in, or everyone's all like, "Yay, we did it! We got the magic before we die! Yay! Magic!" And then, no, magic cursed, magic bad. Stop it! Oh! I'm sorry. And he leaves. Magic! I love this story, man. Chapter 11. On the Verge of Earth. Where are we sitting on time? We're doing pretty good. And on that day, Orion rested his hounds. But the next day he rose early and went to his kennels and loosened the joyous hounds in the shining morning, and led them out of the valley, and over the downs towards the frontier of twilight again. And he took his bow with him no more, but only his sword and his whip. For he had come to love the joy of his 15 hounds, when they hunted the one-horned monster, and felt that he shared the joy of every hound, while to shoot one with an arrow would be but a single joy. All day he went over the fields, greeting some farmer here and there, or worker in the field, and gaining greetings in return, and good wishes for sport. But when the evening came, and he was near the frontier, fewer and fewer greeted him as he passed, for he was manifestly traveling to where none went, and whence even their thoughts held back. So he went lonely, yet cheered by his eager thoughts, and happy in the comradeship of his hounds, and both his thoughts and his hounds were all for the chase. And so he came to the barrier of twilight again, where the hedges ran down to it from the fields of men, and turned strange and dim in a glow. That is not of our earth, and disappeared into the twilight. He stood with his hounds close in against one of these hedges, just where it touched the barrier. The light just there on the hedge. If like anything on our earth, it was like the misty dimness that flashes upon a hedge, seen only across one field, when touched by the rainbow. In the sky the rainbow is clear, but close across one wide field the rainbow's end scarcely shows, yet a heavenly strangeness has touched and altered the hedge. And some such light as that glowed the last of the hawthorns that grew in the fields of men, and just beyond it, like a liquid opal, all full of wandering lights, lay the barrier through which no man can see, and no sound come, but the sound of elfin horns, and only that to the ears of very few. The horns were blowing now, piercing that barrier of dim light and silence with the magical resonance of their silver note. That seemed to beat past all things intervening to come to Orion's ear, as the sunlight beats through ether to illumine the veils of the moon. The horns died down, and nothing whispered from Elfland, and all the sounds henceforth were the sounds of awe. That was a badly read thing. The horns died down, and nothing whispered from Elfland, and all the sounds thenceforth were the sounds of an earthly evening. Give me a second. Reading takes some degree of skill, mind you. The horns died down, and nothing whispered from Elfland, and all the sounds thenceforth were the sounds of an earthly evening. Even these grew few, and still no unicorns came. A dog barked far away. A cart, the sole sound on an empty road, went homeward wearily. Someone spoke in a lane, and then left the silence unbroken, for words seemed to offend the hush that was over all our fields. And in the hush Orion gazed at the frontier, watching for the unicorns that never came, expecting each moment to see one step through the twilight, but he had done unwisely in coming to the same spot at which he had found the 5 unicorns, only 2 days before. For of all creatures the unicorns are the wariest, guarding their beauty from the eye of man with never-ceasing watchfulness, dwelling all day beyond the fields we know, and only entering them rarely at evening, when all is still, and with the utmost vigilance, and venturing even then scarcely beyond the edges. To come on such animals twice, at the same spot, within 2 days with hounds, after hunting and killing one of them, was more unlikely than Orion thought. but his heart was full of the triumph of his hunt, and the scene of it lured him back to it in the way that such scenes have. And now he gazed at the frontier, waiting for one of these great creatures to come proudly through, a great tangible shape out of the dim opalescence. And no unicorn came. And standing, gazing there so long, that curious boundary began to lure him till his thoughts went roaming with its wandering lights, and he desired the peaks of Elfland. And well they knew that lure who dwelt on those farms lying all along the edge of the fields we know, and wisely kept their eyes turned ever away from that wonder that lay within its marvel, of color so near to the backs of their houses. For there was a beauty in it such as not For there was a beauty in it, such as is not in all our fields, and it is told those farmers in youth how, if they gaze upon those wandering lights, there will remain no joy for them in the goodly fields, the fine brown furrows, or the waves of wheat, or in any things of ours, but their hearts will be far from here with elfin things, yearning always for unknown mountains, and for folk not blessed by the freer. Interesting. So, just to spend time considering Elfland seems to be in itself a temptation. Huh. Almost like we mustn't we mustn't consider what lies beyond, because we will want it. We will desire it. I guess I can understand that. Man, my goodness. My God. Time for some more. Ugh. All right. And standing now, while our earthly evening waned, upon the very edge of that magical twilight, the things of earth rushed swiftly from his remembrance. And suddenly all his care was for elfin things. Of all the folk that trod the paths of men, he remembered only his mother, and suddenly knew, as though the twilight had told him, that she was enchanted, and he of a magical line, and none had told him this, but he knew it now. No one told him. I think Alveric wins an award for most absent father in a fairy tale-like story. Goodness gracious. For years he had wandered through many an evening and guessed where his mother was gone. He had guessed in lonely silence. None knew what the child was guessing, and now an answer seemed to hang in the air. It seemed as though she were only a little way off, across the enchanted twilight that divided those farms from Elfland. He moved 3 steps, and came to the frontier itself. His foot was the furthest that stood in the fields we know. Against its face the frontier lay like a mist, in which all the colors of pearls were dancing gravely. A hound stirred as he moved. The pack turned their heads and eyed him. He stood, and they rested again. He tried to see through the barrier, but saw nothing but wandering lights that were made by the massing of twilights from the evening of thousands of days, which had been preserved by magic to build that barrier there. Then he called to his mother across that mighty gap, those few preserved by magic to build that barrier there. Then he, upon one side earth and the haunts of men, and the time that we measure by minutes and hours and years, and upon the other Elfland and another away of time, he called to her twice and listened, and called again, and never a cry or whisper came out of Elfland. He felt then the magnitude of the gulf that divided him from her, and knew it to be vast and dark and strong, like the gulfs that set apart our times from a bygone day, or that stand between daily life and the things of a dream, or between folk tilling the earth and the heroes of song, or between those living yet and those they mourn. And the barrier twinkled and sparkled as though so airy a thing never divided lost years from the fleeting hour called now. He stood there with the cries of earth faint in the late evening behind him, and the mellow glow of the soft earthly twilight, and before him, close to his face, the utter silence of Elfland, and the barrier that made that silence, gleaming with its strange beauty. And now he thought no more of earthly things, but only gazed into that wall of twilight, as prophets tampering with forbidden lore gaze into cloudy crystals. And to all that was elvish in Orion's blood, to all that he had of magic from his mother, the little lights of the twilight builded founder... Jesus. And to all that was elvish in Orion's blood, to all that he had of magic from his mother, the little lights of the twilight builded boundary lured and tempted and beckoned. He thought of his mother dwelling in lonely ease beyond the rage of time. He thought of the glories of Elfland, dimly known by magical memories that he had had from his mother. The little cries of the earthly evening behind him he needed no more, nor heard. And with all these little cries were lost to him also the ways and the needs of men, the things they plan, the things they toil for and hope for, and all the little things their patience achieves. In the new knowledge that had come to him beside this glittering boundary, that he was of magical blood, he desired at once to cast off his allegiance to time, and to leave the lands that lay under time's dominion, and were ever scourged by his tyranny, to leave them with no more than 5 short paces, and to enter the ageless land where his mother sat with her father, while he reigned on his misty throne in that hall of bewildering beauty at which only song has guessed. No more was Earl his home, no more were the ways of man his ways, their fields to his feet no more, but the peaks of the Elfin mountains were to him now that what welcoming eaves off straw are to earthly laborers at evening, the fabulous, the unearthly, were to Orion home. Thus had that barrier of twilight too long seen enchanted him. So much more magical was it than any earthly evening. And there are those that might have gazed long at it and even yet turned away, but not easily, Orion. For though magic has power to charm worldly things, they respond to enchantment heavily and slowly, while all that was magic in Orion's blood flashed answer to the magic that shone in the rampart of Elfland. It was made of the rarest lights that wander in air, and the fairest flashes of sunlight that astonish our fields through the storm, and the mists of little streams, and the glow of the flowers in the moonlight, and all the ends of our rainbows, with all their beauty and magic, and scraps of the gloaming of evening long treasured in aged minds. Into this enchantment he stepped, to have done with mundane things, but as his foot touched the twilight, a hound that had sat behind him under the hedge, held back from the chase so long, stretched its body a little and uttered one of those low cries of impatience that amongst the ways of man most nearly resembles a yawn. An old habit at the sound made Orion turn his head, and he saw the hound, and went up from him for a moment, and patted him, and would have said farewell, but all the hounds were around him then, nosing his hands and looking up at his face. And standing there amongst his eager hounds, Orion, who but a moment before was dreaming of fabulous things, with thoughts that floated over the magical lands, and scaled the enchanted peaks of the Elfin mountains, was suddenly at the call of his earthly lineage. Oh man. It was not that he cared more to hunt than to be with his mother beyond the fret of time, in the lands of her father lovelier than anything song had said. It was not that he cared more to hunt than to be with his mother beyond the fret of time, in the lands of her father lovelier than anything song hath said. It was not that he loved his hounds so much that he could not leave them, but his fathers had followed the chase age after age, and his mother's line had timelessly followed magic, and the call towards magic was strong, while he looked on magical things, and the old earthly line was as strong to beckon him to the chase. The beautiful boundary of twilight had drawn his desires toward Elfland. Next moment his hounds had turned him another way. It is hard for any of us to avoid the grip of external things. For some moments Orion stood thinking among his hounds, trying to decide which way to turn, trying to weigh the easy, lazy ages that hung over untroubled lawns and the listless glories of Elfland, with the good brown plough and the pasture and the little hedges of earth. But the hounds were around him, nosing, crying, looking into his eyes, speaking to him, if tails and paws and large brown eyes can speak, saying, "Away, away!" To think amongst all that tumult was impossible. He could not decide, and the hounds had it their way, and he and they went together home over the fields we know. Interesting. What a great way to put it. For lack of another way to put it. The pull of the magic of... I'm kind of enamored with this, the way they've described this, or the way Dunsany has set this up. Just as someone of half-elfin lineage, this pull of the magic of his mother, of the lands of Elfin land, just that so strong a pull, calls to him from a, oh man. After reading this, if I'm going to apply this to things tabletop or playing in terms of, I've played elf characters before. I've played half-elf characters before, but never have I really considered what that means in the role, what that's about. And a half-elf is torn, conflicted, pulled in two different ways. Pulled towards the human, the hunt, the things that bring joy to humans. In this case, his joy is in the hunt, the searching, the journey, and the pull, the allure of the chaotic Elflands, the beautiful Elflands, the tempting of magic. It draws him. I love the way it's described. I love the way this chapter plays out as he's there. And what an interesting thing to have the dogs be what pull him back. It was mentioned a few chapters back that the troll who had come through to the fields we know in his cartwheeling glory, he feared dogs because they were lawful. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing back there, that dogs are kind of considered this force of like lawful, and they're at opposition to chaos, or the chaos of the ways of like the elfin ways. So like there's this natural fear of elf kind against dogs or elf creature. So it's interesting that they'd be like, "You're not going in there, mate, are you? He's going in there, buddy. We should bark at him. We should yawn at him. Oh, don't go." Anyways, every chapter that kind of has one of these moments, it just makes me fall in love with the story. I don't believe I have enough time to read another chapter. Let me just take a look. I do actually. We're going to do this. We're going to do another chapter, I think. And then we'll have to be done. Oh, this is so good. This is chapter 22. Orion appoints a whip. And let me just, I need to sip on my disappointing coffee here. It smells good, though. And many times again, while the winter wore away, Orion went back again with his hounds to that wonderful boundary, and waited there while the earthly twilight faded, and sometimes saw the unicorns come through, craftily, silently, when our fields were still, great beautiful shapes of white. But he brought back no more horns to the castle of Earl, nor hunted again across the fields we know, for the unicorns, when they came, moved into our fields no more than a few bare paces, and Orion was not able to cut one off again. Once, when he tried, he nearly lost all his hounds, some being already within the boundary when he beat them back with his whip. Another 2 yards, and the sound of his earthly horn could never more have reached them. It was this that taught him that for all the power that he had over his hounds, and even though in that power was something of magic, yet one man without help could not hunt hounds, so near to that edge over which, if one should stray, it would be lost forever. After this, Orion watched the lads at their games and evenings at Earl, till he had marked 3 that in speed and strength seemed to excel the rest, and 2 of these he chose to be whippers in. He chose to be whippers in. What the heck is that? Whippers in. We're going to do something I haven't done in a while and look this up. Whippers in. I can type. A huntsman's assistant who brings straying hounds back into the pack. Oh, okay. Let me just back up then. At this, Orion watched the lads at their games and evenings at Earl, till he had marked 3 that in speed and strength seemed to excel the rest, and 2 of these he chose to be whippers in. He went to the cottage of one of them when the games were over, just as the lights were lit, a tall lad with a great speed of limb. The lad and his mother were there, and both rose from the table as the father opened the door and Orion came in. And cheerily Orion asked the lad if he would come with the hounds and carry a whip and prevent them from straying. And a silence fell. All knew that Orion hunted strange beasts and took his hounds to strange places. None there had ever stepped beyond the fields we know. The lad feared to pass beyond them. His parents were full loath to let him go. At length the silence was broken by excuses and muttered sentences and unfinished things, and Orion saw that the lad would not come. Okay, first kid not doing this. Fascinating. Sorry, my chair is sinking. I have a slowly sinking chair. He went then to the house of the other. There, too, the candles were lit, and a table spread. There were 2 old women there, and the lad at their supper. And to them Orion told how he needed a whipper in, and asked the lad to come. Their fear in that house was more marked. The old women cried out together that the lad was too young, that he could not run so well as he used to, that he was not worthy of so great an honor, that dogs never would trust him. And much more than this they said, till they became incoherent. Orion left them, and went to the house of the third. It was the same here. The elders had desired magic for Earl, but the actual touch of it, the mere thought of it, perturbed the folk in their cottages. None would spare their sons to go whither they knew not, to have dealings with things that rumor, like a large and sinister shadow, had so grimly magnified in the hamlet of Earl. So Orion went alone with his hounds, when he took them up from the valley, and went eastwards over our fields, where earth's folk would not go. It was late in the month of March, and Orion slept in his tower, when there came up to him from far below, shrill and clear in the early morning, the sound of his peacocks calling. The bleat of sheep far up on the downs came to wake him too, and cocks were crowing clamorously, for spring was singing through the sunny air. He rose and went to his hounds, and soon early laborers saw him go up the steep side of the valley, with all his hounds behind him, tan patches against the green. And so he passed over the fields we know, and so he was come before the sun had set to that strip of land from which all men turned away, where westward stood men's houses among fields of fat brown clay, and eastward the Elfland mountains shone over the boundary of twilight. He went with his hounds along the last hedge, down to the boundary, and no sooner had he come there than he saw a fox quite close slip out of the twilight between earth and Elfland, and run a few yards along the edge of our fields, and then slip back again. And of this Orion thought nothing, for it is the way of the fox thus to haunt the edge of Elfland, and to return again to our fields. It is thus that he brings us something of which none of our cities guess. But soon the fox appeared again out of the twilight, and ran a little way, and was back in the luminous barrier once more. Then Orion watched to see what the fox was doing. And yet again it appeared in the field we know, and dodged back into the twilight, and the hounds watched too, and showed no longing to hunt for it, for they had tasted fabulous blood. Orion walked along beside the twilight in the direction in which the fox was going, with his curiosity growing, the more that the fox dodged in and out of our fields. The hounds followed him slowly, and soon lost their interest in what the fox was doing, and all at once the curious thing was explained, for Luraloo all of a sudden skipped through the twilight, and that troll appeared in our fields, and it was with him that the fox was playing. "A man!" said Luraloo aloud to himself, or to his comrade the fox, speaking in troll talk, and all at once Orion remembered the troll that had come into his nursery with his little charm against time, and had leaped from shelf to shelf and across the ceiling, and enraged Zerundarel, who had feared for her crockery. "The troll," he said, also in troll talk, for his mother had murmured it to him as a child, when she told him tales of the trolls and their age-old songs. "Oh, who is this that knows troll talk?" said Luraloo. And Orion told his name, and this meant nothing to Luraloo, but he squatted down and rummaged a little while in what answers the troll. But he squatted down and rummaged a little while. And Orion told his name, and this meant nothing to Luraloo, but he squatted down and rummaged a little while in what answers in troll to our memory. And during his ransacking of much trivial remembrance that had eluded the destruction of time in the fields we know, and the listless apathy of the unchanging ages in Elfland, he came all at once on his remembrance of Earl, and looked at Orion again, and began to cogitate. And at this same moment Orion told to the troll the august name of his mother. At once Luraloo made what is known amongst the trolls of Elfland as the abasement of the 5 points. That is to say, he bowed himself to the ground on his 2 knees, his 2 hands, and his forehead. Then he sprang up again with a high leap into the air, whoom! For reverence rested not on his spirit long. "What are you doing in men's fields?" said Orion. "Well, playing," said Lurlu. "What do you do in Elfland?" "Watch time," said Lurlu. "Well, that would not amuse me," said Orion. "You've never done it," said Lurlu. "You cannot watch time in the fields of men." "Why not?" asked Orion. "It moves too fast." Orion pondered a while on this, but could make nothing of it, because never having gone from the fields we know, he knew only one pace of time, and so had no means of comparison. "How many years have gone over you?" asked the troll, "since we spoke in Earl?" "Years?" said Orion. 100? guessed the troll. "Nearly 12, said Orion. "And you?" "It is still today," said the troll. Oh my goodness. That is cool. Sorry. That's really cool. And Orion would not speak any more of time, for he cared not for the discussion of a subject of which he appeared to know less than a common troll. "Will you carry a whip," he said, "and run with my hounds when we hunt the unicorn over the fields we know?" Lurlu looked searchingly at the hounds, watching their brown eyes. The hounds turned doubtful noses towards the troll and sniffed inquiringly. "They are dogs," said the troll, as though that were against them. "Yet they have pleasant thoughts." "You will carry the whip, then," said Orion. Yes, said the troll. Oh my goodness. So Orion gave him his own whip, there and then, and blew his horn, and went away from the twilight, and told Lurlu to keep the hounds together, and to bring them on behind him. And the hounds were uneasy at the sight of the troll, and sniffed again, but could not make him human, and were loath to obey a creature no larger than them. They ran up to him through curiosity, and ran away in disgust, and straggled through disobedience. But the boundless resources of that nimble troll were not thus easily thwarted, and the whip went suddenly up, looking 3 times as large in that tiny hand, and the lash flew forward and cracked on the tip of the hound's nose. The hound yelped, then looked astonished, and the rest were uneasy still. They must have thought it an accident. But again the lash shot forward and cracked on another nose tip, and the hound saw then that it was not chance that guided those stinging shots, but a deadly, unerring eye. And from that time on they reverenced Lurlu, although he never smelt human. So went Orion and his pack of hounds in the late evening homewards, and no sheepdog kept the flock on wolf-hunted wold safer or closer than Lurlu kept the pack. He was on each flank or behind them, wherever a straggler was, and could leap right over the pack from side to side. And the pale blue elfin mountains faded from view before Orion had gone from the frontier as much as 100 paces, for their gloomless peaks were hid by the earthly darkness that was deepening wide over the fields we know. Homeward they went, and soon there appeared above them in the wandering multitude of our earthly... Wow. I just completely died on that sentence. Homeward they went, and soon there appeared above them the wandering multitude of our earth-seen stars. Lurlu now then looked up to marvel at them, as we have all done at some time, but for the most part he fixed his attention on the hounds, for now that he was in earthly fields he was concerned with the things of earth, and never one hound loitered but that Lurlu's whip would touch him, with its tiny explosion, perhaps on the tip of its tail, scattering a little dust of fragments of hair and whipcord. And the hound would yelp and run into the others, and all the pack would know that another of those unerring shots had gone home. A certain grace with a whip, a certain sureness of aim, comes when a life is devoted to the carrying of a whip amongst hounds. Comes, say, in 20 years, and sometimes it runs in families, and that is better than years of practice. But neither years of practice nor the want of the whip in the blood can give us the certain aim that one thing can, and that one thing is magic. The hurl of the lash, as immediate as sudden turn of an eye, its flash to a chosen spot as direct as sight, were not of this earth. And though the cracks of that whip might have seemed to be passing men to be no more than the work of an earthly huntsman, yet not a hound but knew that there was in it more than this, a thing from beyond our fields. Man, sometimes these sentences can get me. Of any book. Wraps my tongue up in the mornings. There was a touch of dawn in the sky when Orion saw again the village of Earl, sending up pillars of smoke from early fires below him, and came with his hounds and his new whipper in down the side of the valley. Early windows winked at him as he went down the street, and came in silence and chill to the empty kennels. And when the hounds were all curled up on their straw, he found a place for Lurloo, a mouldering loft in which were sacks and a few heaps of hay. From a pigeon loft just beyond it, some of the pigeons had strayed, and dwelt all along the rafters. There Orion left Lurloo, and went to his tower, cold with the want of sleep and food, and weary as he would not have been if he had found a unicorn. But the noise of the troll's chatter when he had found him on the frontier had made it useless to watch for those wary beasts that evening. Orion slept, but the troll in the mouldering loft sat long on his bundle of hay, observing the ways of time. He saw through cracks in the old shutters the stars go moving by. He saw them pale. He saw the other lights spread. He saw the wonder of sunrise. He felt the gloom of the loft all full of the coo of the pigeons. He watched their restless ways. He heard wild birds stir near elms, and men abroad in the morning, and horses and carts and cows, and everything changing as the morning grew. A land of change! The decay of the boards in the loft, and the moss outside in the mortar, and old lumber mouldering away, all seemed to tell the same story, change and nothing abiding. He thought of the age-old calm that held the beauty of Elfland. And then he thought of the tribe of the trolls he had left, wondering what they would think of the ways of earth. And the pigeons were suddenly terrified by wild peals of Lurloo's laughter. We'll end that there, but I have to say, like, every chapter has been something new and interesting. And to start with, you've got the men, the Parliament of Earl, who have set this all into motion. Like, we need some new thing. Get us magic, which brings Lyrazel in to the world, and Orion into the world, and now he's starting to bring magical things in. It's very fascinating. We're still trucking along at this, and now that I've kind of broken the seal and come back into streaming, I'm going to try to keep this more active because I want to finish this much faster than I am. But the question still remains on whether or not it's better to do this in the morning when I'm still kind of rough and when people are waking up or doing their work, or if I should be doing this a little bit later at night. One problem with streaming anything in terms of California time is that we're early. We're early for a lot of things. So if anyone's not from here, it's always later. And if I start reading it sometime at like 8 or 9 at night, that's pretty late for folk. So I may ask around on X and see what's going on. I'll see if anyone has any sort of insights. I was originally trying to do more streams just to get a sense of when audience would exist, checking stats and things like that. No, not quite. Yeah, so anyways, I leave it there. This was really fun. I love this book so much. Fascinating read. I love its depiction of elves in general, and the magics of fairy, and just the pull between elf and humankind. I think the prose works well for this. Anyways, I leave you to it. If you're interested, get a hold of this copy. This is the copy that we're reading. Any copy will do, but if you want to follow along exactly, we're reading that edition, and we're going to be on page 153 the next time. Lurloo watches the restlessness of Earth. So we get some more of the troll, this funny troll that has only been who has only been observing this for a day. Meanwhile, years have passed. So fascinating. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.